In progress. I'm going to promote
Okay, okay. And don't move. These should all be automatically loaded. Okay, the payments here. Maybe you can make an announcement at the beginning for those who need to be promoted, those on the tag, raise their hand.
Hi, folks. We're just getting gathered here. Thank you. Hi, folks. We're just getting gathered here, but for those who are members of the tag, if you've joined the Zoom and you need to be promoted to panelist, if you could raise your hand, and that way we'll know where you're at and we'll be able to promote you. And we'll get started in just a few minutes. All right, folks, we're going to get underway. First, I'll start with reading some housekeeping remarks, and then we'll get the meeting started. So we'll start off with those. Good morning, and thank you for participating in our third hybrid MATES Technical Advisory Group meeting for the South Coast AQMD. We have 3 formats for participation: in-person, Zoom, and teleconference. If you're attending in person, please do not connect to the Zoom application or teleconference while in the meeting room. Please silence your other communication devices to prevent disruptions during the meeting. All participants on Zoom, except for MATES Technical Advisory Group members, South Coast AQMD staff, and if there happen to be board members involved, will be placed on mute by the host. You will not be able to mute or unmute your line manually. After each agenda item, Technical Advisory Group members will have a chance to provide feedback and ask questions. On the final agenda item, the public will be able to comment on any agenda item. The Q&A button in Zoom can also be used for public comment at any time during the meeting. For those on Zoom, if you would like to make a public comment on the Zoom screen, please click on the Raise Hand button. For those calling in by phone, you can dial *9 to signal that you would like to comment. Your name or part of your phone number will be called when it is your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Please note you can hang up or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Please treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being dropped from the meeting. For those of you in the room, the nearest restrooms are located through the door at the back of the room. Continue through the second door, and the restrooms are on the left. Lastly, please be aware that this video conference meeting is being recorded. By participating in this meeting hosted by South Coast AQMD, you agree to authorized recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to the subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD. Great. All right. Well, with that taken care of, we have a packed agenda today. So welcome, everybody. Glad to see those in the room as well as those who are on our Zoom teleconference. So I'll just introduce myself real quickly. My name is Sarah Reese. I'm the Deputy Executive Officer for Planning, Rule Development, and Implementation here at South Coast. Maybe go down the line and introduce the team. So Scott, go ahead.
Morning, everyone. My name's Scott Epstein. I'm a Planning and Rules Manager in the Planning Division at South Coast.
I'm James. I'm a Senior Office Assistant for AB 2588.
I'm Daphne Seal. I'm an attorney here at the district.
Good morning. I'm Sang-Mi Lee, Planning and Rules Manager, oversees modeling, inventory, and SIP development. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jason Lowe. I'm the lead for the Monitoring Analysis Division.
Hey everyone, my name is Mohammed Solat, AB617 Monitoring Team Program Supervisor under the Monitoring and Analysis Division.
Payam Parkbin, Atmospheric Measurements Manager in Monitoring and Analysis Division.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nishkrish Murthy. I'm an air quality specialist in diversity, equity, and inclusion with Community Air Protection Program here at South Coast AQMD.
Great, thanks, everybody. So maybe with that, we have our full agenda. So we'll turn with agenda item 1. And I think that's you, Sangmi. Take it away.
Thank you, Sarah. So slide up, please. So good morning. Again, this item is introducing the emissions inventory and regional air quality modeling capabilities to support MATES 6. This is a team effort. We have a group of modelers and even emission inventory specialists working on this item. Next slide. So brief outline of this presentation is, first I will introduce modeling capabilities and frameworks used in various applications in the agency. And then talking about the emissions inventory and then what we have done in the past MATES and the suggestions or the plans for upcoming MATES and the new edition we are in consideration. Next one. So this one is showing that our measure, the modeling effort. So we put in 2 categories. The first one we call it state implementation supporting capacity, and the other is MATES or exposure modeling capacity. The SIP component, the state implementation plans, are our major extensive modeling effort. So we use this extensive modeling framework that consists of CMAQ, WRF, SMOKE, MFAC, and MEGAN, all big names. We use the chemical speciation algorithm called SAFRAG 07 because traditionally this has been working very well for urban ozone issues. And then we use 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer spatial grid resolution with full chemistry. And then as you mentioned, since this is a SIP effort, it focuses on criteria pollutants. The difference in the MATES or exposure modeling part is we have used a little different model called ChemX with the inert tracer tracking mechanism called RTRAC. This has been the primary MATES modeling in all past MATES models, MATES projects. Chemical mechanism more or less equivalent, but then grid resolution is 1/4 of the SIP modeling effort, meaning that 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer resolution. And of course, this one includes air toxics simulation. Next one. So this shows the modeling domain. So the larger one depicted with the green boundaries are our SIP modeling domain. It includes the entire South Coast jurisdiction and the neighboring air districts and even northern part of the Mexico. But when it comes to MATES, since the focus is to provide a higher resolution modeling estimates, so we go down to the smaller domain, and this red one is the one used in the MATES 5. As you can see, it covers the entire South Coast Basin, depicted by a blue line, and the majority of Coachella Valley. Next one. So a little bit of inventory part. So emissions inventory consists of 4 major components with 4 major categories, starting with point and area source wise. So point source wise, we have annual emissions reporting requirement for certain facilities. If a facility emits the larger than 4 tons per year of NOx or VOC or SOx, or they emit more than 100 tons of CO per year, then they are subject to annual emission reporting requirement. So for those facilities, we use the reported emissions. And then typically this includes criteria pollutants, but they also include a limited number of tags. Tags means toxic air contaminants. In addition to that, some facilities subject to even more requirement under AB 2588 hotspot program. So if you subject to this hotspot program, you need to report 177 different types of tags every 4 years. Area sources, on the other hand, these are kind of aggregate of very small sources, like individual houses or gas stations type of thing. So for those emissions, we start from the state total, sometimes county total, sometimes Southern California total. So that the top-down approach, we start from the large-scale total consumptions or activity data, and then breaking down to the county level. Next one. Mobile source emissions are more or less relatively well known. On-road mobile sources, obviously, that's all the vehicles on the road. Travel activity data comes from SCAG, Southern California Association of Governments, and emission factors coming on-road mobile source model called MFAC, that the car has primary responsibility to maintain and update it. Off-road source models are kind of case by case. So for example, let's say some construction equipment, the forklift or bulldozers that's shown here, then some of these equipments are required to report their activity and then informations to CARB's portal through internet. And those reported data is used to estimate emissions. On the other hand, let's say if it is aircraft, then the aircraft operation data is available through FAA, and those data are primarily source of the aircraft emissions. Next slide. So then what type of emission inventories are available? Because this emission inventory is really the the main primary resources that we have for the modeling. So the latest available inventory was developed a few years ago to support 2022 AQMD, Air Quality Management Plan effort. And also it got updated in last year to support our another SIP revision to demonstrate attainment of PM 2.5. These inventories used 2018 as a base year, meaning that so all the activity data, population data, even this head count of some animals, they were actually reported for 2018, and we use those data as much as possible. And then using this data, the inventory can be projected forward or backward based on socioeconomic projections from SCAG or historical data. So for the MATES 6, we are targeting 2025 would be the primary modeling year. But then on the other hand, emission inventory evolves all the time, meaning that when there is new information comes, that's reflected to the inventory. And there is a major SIP effort coming up soon in a couple of years. And to support this SIP effort, there will be updated emissions inventory, and those updated information will be reflected as much as feasible. Next slide. So then we established that there is a reported emission and then there are county total emissions, but these are far from model ready. So to make it model ready, you gotta do several steps for this equation. For example, the county total emissions has to be distributed to individual modeling grid, and they have to be distributed to individual hour of an entire year or chemical species to estimate toxic emissions, toxic air contaminants emissions. So this illustration here is, so this obviously this is County of LA map, and it shows the major roadways. So this type of major roadways serve as a high resolution spatial surrogates. You combine them to the modeling grid that is just a box shape showing in the lower left corner. You combine them, and then using this surrogate information, county total emissions are assigned to individual cell of a model. Similar process needs to be done for the temporal allocation and chemical speciation. So next slide, we'll talk temporal allocation. Next one. Chemical speciation first, my apology. So a majority of the reported emissions or SIP emissions focus on criteria of pollutants, we call it CAP. These include VOC, NOx, SOx, ammonia, PM2.5, and lead. But then this MATES focuses on toxic compounds. So these toxic emissions, as mentioned in the earlier slide, some large facilities report these TAC emissions every year. So there are 24 species that reported every year. Once it is reported, that becomes primary, that has priority. But then there are other sources, as mentioned. There are area sources and then other mobile sources. Then we have to use a certain toxic or chemical speciation profile to estimate individual tag emissions. So for that, we use total organic compounds to speciate gaseous phase, the toxic air contaminants. And then we also use TSP for particle phase tags. Next slide. Temporal profiles. So we start from stationary sources. So this temporal profile, again, we have only one data point when it comes to SIP inventory. It is annual average. So you have to allocate to every hour of the modeling input, modeling domain. It can be sometimes monthly average, it can be day of week, or it can be every hour of an entire year. So there are hundreds of unique profiles depending on source category. So the plot on the right is an example. So if you can distinguish, for example, the green line showing the oil production, if you can kind of focus on the green line, you can see it's just a straight line. That means the production activities in oil production category does not change depending on time of a day or day of a week or even season. So it is always constant. On the other hand, let's say some industry type, chemical industry, so that's an orange solid line. If you squint into it, it's kind of production is maximum or activity level is maximum during daytime and it goes to the zero. So first of all, this one profile is actually represent the entire week. So the bottom means that those are, the zero means those are during the nighttime or off hour. And then a red broken line is residential wood combustion. This is just the default profile provided in the CARBS depository. So then this broken line, so it goes down during nighttime. So you can see the same as orange line going to zero. So those are during really sleeping times. And then during daytime, it goes kind of a minimum level, close to that, the oil production levels. But then during early morning and then late evening hours, transition hours, that there is some, could be some wood burning the activities. So these are just example how annual emissions are allocated to modeling hours. Next slide. So then when it comes to mobile sources, we utilize more massive big data as much as feasible. So on-road emission part, we have seen these slides. I think this was presented in the very first tech meeting. But the simplest way to see is you check your traffic information on your internet, on your phone every day. That information comes from this sensor data. And for major freeways, major roadways in California, the data is called the PAMS, Performance Measurement System. It is maintained by Caltrans. So we utilize this data to allocate the on-road vehicles for the entire year. So each point of our modeling domain and each hour of an entire year of modeling has unique allocation factors based on this sensor data. Next one. Ocean-going vessels utilizing AIS called Automated Identification System. Again, you have seen this data. All the ocean-going vessels have, many of them has this AIS information available. But good thing of this is the vessels identify the types of them. So whether they are cargo vessels, military vessels, passenger, cruiser vessels, or tankers. So we know the vessel type, which is great information. And also they indicate the operation mode, whether they are in transit, or they are in anchorage, or maneuvering inside breakwater, or hoteling, meaning that at berth, at the port. So utilizing this information, we can really allocate ocean-going vessel emissions in really detailed level. So the lower right corner picture that depicting this OGV, or we call ship emissions allocated. So what it shows is that dark line that is so-called major shipping channels from ports of LA going to the north or going down to the south, Mexico route, or there is even their indication to the Hawaiian route. So going straight to the west from the ports. These major shipping channels has more emissions definitely, but then in between spaces have some emissions as well. And this transponder data enabled such information to be utilized in the modeling. Next slide. Aircraft emission is interesting ones. So first of all, we utilize FAA's model called AEDT, Aviation Environmental Design Tool. And so that estimate aircraft total emissions per airport. But then you have to utilize this information again, how to allocate the time domain and the spatial domain for modeling. For that purposes, we use, again, this commercial aircraft positioning data called ACARS. So and then we utilize, and also another tool is the ACARS are only for commercial airports and usually available for large airports. And then some small airports, they do not provide sufficiently accumulated data to come up with a solid conclusion. So for those cases, CARB also developed an algorithm called GATE. So we utilize those for small airports. So the fun part was showing in the lower right corner. So you see that the pink spread more or less east-west. That is LAX location, which is consistent to our understanding that runway in LAX runs in east-west direction. So aircraft runs takeoff or landing from the runway has that extension on that direction. So it is realistic representation of aircraft emissions. Next slide. So from here, I kind of briefly touch base on what we have done for MATES 5 modeling. So we used the ChemX model, we modeled the entire year, and we used the modeling domain that covers South Coast Basin and majority of Coachella Valley, and we used the inventory that best available at the time of MATES 5. Next one. Just a simple example, we all know that diesel PM is the primary driver of cancer risk in the basin. So showing the diesel emissions from ocean-going vessels, that's the top one. And the lower left is on-road emissions. It's pretty much tracking the roadways, major roadways. And on the right is diesel PM emissions from trains. It follows train tracks. Next one. So this information, this emission information going into chemical transport model, and then it calculates concentrations of different species. So that is on the bottom. This one is primary and secondary. This is DPM examples, but then any components can be estimated through this process. And then you combine all these different components and then come up with the cancer risk that is utilizing the unique cancer risk factors provided by OEA. So that also upper right corner, the plot is fairly popular from MATES 5, and then lower right showing the individual the contribution of different chemical species. As you know, the DPM is the major driver, and the next one is the benzene and 1,3-butadiene. Next one. So just out of curiosity, if you'd like to see the emissions of 1,3-butadiene, that is on the lower left, it pretty much emphasized the location of the stationary sources and then somehow dispersed in between spaces. And then benzene also, it's showing that it shows the point source locations, but also it tracks the roadways and another mobile source tracks as well. Next one. So we had a question about the model performance and the first TAC meeting, and this is a depict of the model performance of EC 2.5. Since EC has been used as a surrogate to estimate the DPM in the measurement data. So this is entire year of the simulation, and then you see more the elevated concentrations during colder season. But in general, the model performance, that black solid dot follows the measurement given in the blue. The model prediction in black solid line is in general in reasonable agreement with measurement depicted in blue dots. Next slide. So then what are we thinking for this upcoming MATES? So one changes or improvement we considering is switching to the CMAQ model. That is, the CMAQ is well tested and then well validated to support the SIP modeling effort. Then we have quite a bit of experiences and expertise in CMAQ model. But then whenever you change model, there can be some disparities caused by the shifting of the methodology or shifting of the model. So the positive, the pros for this transition is all the emissions and the model capabilities extensively tested and validated. So it is a streamlining. But then the downside could be we gotta be aware of disparities or discrepancies caused by this change of model. Next one. So modeling team has done some preliminary test. If we are switching to the CMAC model platform, what's the impact? What could be the impact to the cancer risk? So this is a difference plot of the CMAC versus ChemX model that used in the last MATE 5. And then this is very preliminary, but then what it indicates is in the table on the lower right. So as a basin total, there could cause like up to 6% differences in cancer risk. This is population I averaged again. Coachella Valley, barely like 1% difference. This is really small. So there could be some differences caused by this, but this percentage difference is still really small compared to model performances and biases. Next slide. The next area we are exploring is neighborhood scale modeling. So there are other agencies who focused on air toxic modeling. So US EPA has their own tool called Air Toxic Screen. And then CARB also developed their tool, California Air Toxic Assessment CARA. This one has been discussed and presented to CAPCOA meeting last year. And then we have our SIP modeling that we took closer look at more neighborhood scale recently. So all this effort is looking into the scales much smaller than 2 kilometer grid. But then when it comes to this higher resolution approach, again, there are pros and cons. Pros means that higher resolution data, it might be more informative for some decision-making occasions. But then downside, you gotta be really careful you are presenting. Whether model capability and physics and chemistry supports that high resolution assumptions, high resolution situations. So while we have successful examples as shown here, and then even in-house effort in SIP modeling, we utilized this hybrid approach, but then still we need to be careful how credible the information or how reliable the model output or final products would be. Next slide. So with this kind of ideas of a high resolution approach, what we are considering is some sort of a hybrid approach. So hybrid meaning that as we presented all these regional modeling approaches using ChemX or CMAC, and then we use a dispersion model, air model, this US EPA's model, you combine those two. So for example, line source model, let's see, the second or even third one, the thicker lines are representing major roadways and freeways, and that kind of checker box is modeling grid. So definitely the roadways are higher resolution than the model grid, and its impact could be more exaggerated right in the vicinity of roadways. So then the idea is you maybe model the roadways assuming those are line sources and use it in dispersion air mod. Or also the major large facility emissions you plug into this model. You plug into dispersion model and then treat as a point source and then come up with its impact in higher resolution. And then some large facilities such as airports and then rail yards, we know, especially airports, we know that emissions not just staying on the ground level, it can go really, it acts like a volume source. So we reserve these emission sources in more detailed level and then combine them with the discrete model. So the plots here are one example of it. So it is more like focusing on Southeast LA area. It reserves all this, the point sources showing as a dots in the lower left one. and then major roadways are shown in the middle one, and then you simulate these separately and combine with the regional model, and that's the concentration distribution shown in the right. Next one. So the summary of our emissions inventory modeling capability was we are fairly confident that we have extensive the experience and expertise in this area, and then we have the most accurate emissions inventory as far as comes to our jurisdictional area. MH6 will rely on the latest SIP modeling framework, which is mainly about the CMAQ model. And the neighborhood scale modeling will be explored depending on the model accuracy and then the resource availability. So this concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Sang-Mi, for that presentation. Now, if there's any questions from our technical advisory group, this would be the time to ask Sang-Mi. And I see we have online, Will Porter, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. It's very interesting, Sang-Mi. Thanks for that presentation. I was wondering if you could go into a little bit more detail about how these two approaches using the dispersion and the chemical transport modeling, how that hybrid approach is synthesized. Like, is this a plume and grid type approach, or what's the order of operations in terms of integrating both of those two different modeling types?
Good morning, Will. Yeah, thank you for your attention and question. And that's a really great question. So one approach is plumbing grid, like online coupled approach, and then CMAQ does have that capability. But then what we explored so far is offline approach. So you get the model, the CMAQ model, and then that pretty much provide boundary conditions or grid average values. And then higher variability that comes from AirMod, the offline platform. But this approach is very consistent with what EPA does for air toxic screen, or even what the CARB does for their CARA. CARB uses a CMAQ and then CALPUF, so it's PUF model, but the idea is very similar, offline modeling, but coupled in offline format.
Thank you. A quick follow-up there. Do we have data yet that shows at that neighborhood scale resolution the accuracy of those types of model outputs? Is that something that's been assessed in terms of how much that resolution is actually translating into accuracy?
Yeah, that's also a great question, Will. I think that is also has to be coordinated with the measurement data, to validate it. So that type of measurement data is not, or even modeling approach, we are not inventing this in a sense. So that type of measurement data has been available in Bay Area or even the part of the country as well. The mobile platform utilized or enabled that type of high resolution data. Having said that, so validation is still a little bit further away, but then what we feel is there are definitely signal. We have utilized a similar method in recent SIP revision modeling, so that resolving the impact of near roadways and versus the CMAQ, or in other words, the impact of near roadways and the discrepancy from the CMAQ model, which just sees the grid average. So when you are comparing grid average value, you cannot compare it with the near road monitored data. So there are a lot of rooms to improve, but then yeah, it is definitely a very interesting area.
Got it. Thank you.
All right, I see Philip Hopke, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things. One of the things we've been working on is seeing that although NOx is going down, nitrate is not going down as fast, and the idea has been that likely seeing more ammonia emissions. And there's just been a recent paper in Atmospheric Environment by EPA indicating they're going to boost their ammonia emission estimates by of the order of a factor of 1.8. And so I wondered whether you were aware of that. Also, Chelsea Preble at Berkeley has been doing ammonia measurements on the trucks driving out from the Port of Oakland, so that she's got some actual real world data on ammonia that might be useful as well. So, I wondered whether you had been able to use some of these things to update your ammonia emissions from vehicles.
Thank you, Phil. That's actually that's great. Great question too. So for the emissions inventory wise, so ammonia emission is definitely, I would say, higher levels of uncertainties than other pollutants such as NOx or VOC or SOx that we have expertise for decades. But then on the other hand, ammonia emission, for example, we expect the largest source of ammonia emissions in the basin is humans and pets. Because we do not have really, huge agricultural activities. But I guess your question was also, it is a sort of ammonia emissions coming from SCR because you are mentioning the mobile sources. So we do have ammonia the measurement, maybe rather pass it to our monitoring folks about the Picaro measurement.
Yeah, so during these mates, we added, I believe, 3 locations, right?
Two.
Two
actually,
locations for ammonia monitoring. So
Yeah.
like that's another addition to the previous mates study.
So we have the Picaro instrument that is deployed and measured in the basin at least several years. One is located in central LA, and the other location is Rubidoux that we had a collaboration with the faculty at UC Riverside. So we have been monitoring this ammonia levels using Picaro, and then this MATES 6 will continue that effort.
Yeah, but if you're going to try and do as detailed mobile source estimations as you were showing there, it's directly on the roads rather than the more general ammonia emissions that matter. So as I say, if I were you, I would check with Chelsea Preble up at Berkeley and see if she's got some detailed amount, because those are then a number of trucks, older trucks, and she can give you approximate emissions per truck. The other point is that we've just published our source apportionment from the MATES 4 and 5 results, and I'd be happy to share the detailed apportionments across the 10 sites. I've sent Scott and Mohammed and others the paper that final version just came out yesterday. But if you want to use any of those results for some comparisons with your past simulations, we'd be happy to have that happen.
Thank you, Phil. We'll take up your offer.
Great, thanks. So we also have a hand raised from Michael Jarrett. Michael, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to leave my camera off because I'm getting some medical treatment for skin condition on my face, and I'm going to see a few layers of skin. So, yeah, I guess very interesting. And unfortunately, I missed part of the beginning of the talk because I had another meeting that was running overtime, and I was a lead reviewer and I couldn't leave. But on the hybrid modeling, I mean, one thing you might want to consider is taking even more sources of data. So taking the EPA data, the CARB data, and then doing, an ensemble machine learning approach. So that, some of the, like the super learner ensemble type models, those will, they'll pick the best prediction for different areas of your domain. And it's possible that some models, even though they're on a coarser scale, might predict better in some locations than others, with the idea that you're going to, maximize those neighborhood level predictions. So I'm happy to share some examples of that. And you could also think about training the models on some of the earlier MATES data as well, so that you could incorporate more of the previous ground measurements to calibrate your current models and to test them before you get the current MATES data. So just something to think about, and I'm happy to supply follow-up references if needed.
Yeah, thanks for your comment, Mike. Yeah, we'll be happy to follow up with this idea with you. But we also need to be very aware of the assumptions and data used in other modeling, like especially EPA's air toxic screen uses very different approaches. And then we have extensive discussion with them and we have some suggestions for them as well. But then, so we are aware of other modeling kind of limitations and advantages. But in general, yes, ensemble is a great idea. So we're happy to discuss with you.
Great.
Okay,
Thanks
thanks.
Heidi, for that. All right. I'm not seeing any other hands raised from the technical advisory group. So, oh, sorry.
It's okay. We all focused on the tech more than what's in front of us. That's fine. Two quick questions. The first is with the monitoring, and especially as the technology is getting better, are there any surprise natural emitters, pollution emitters that you have found that would be of interest to note? And also, are there any environmental factors that confound your ability to make these measurements?
So natural sources are included in all our models. What the most known is the plants, right? The vegetations, they actually emit VOCs, which are toxic. Some of them are more toxic than others. So we do include all those emissions in the modeling. How much coming from which species, we still do our best to improve it or with collaboration with outside experts. But then surprises wise, I'm not aware of, but I hope it doesn't come because we don't like surprises. And then second part, but if you are aware of any, let us know if you somehow know that, oh, these sources must be really something that you guys should look at it, type of things, we know it, but then we're happy to look at it. Monitoring part, maybe I will pass on to
So I was just
Jason.
going to say, I mean, the measurements are agnostic to where the source is, right? It is just measuring a specific chemical in the air as it's observed at the station. So as Sangmi said, I mean, if there are certain biological markers that are considered air toxics, then it's something that we can look at if it's not already part of the suite of compounds that we're already looking at.
Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. So I think that concludes the questions for this topic. So maybe we'll move on to the next agenda item. And I think Nish and Mohammed are going to give a presentation on how the MATES data can be used to inform issues in our EJ communities. Take it away, guys.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. So can we move to the next slide, please? So hi, everyone. My name is Nish Krishnamurthy. I'm an air quality specialist here at South Coast AQMD in the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion with Community Air programs, where I help implement the community emissions reduction plan for one of our AB 617 communities. And so today I'm going to be giving an overview of South Coast AQMD's Assembly Bill 617 or AB 617 program, in an effort to give examples of how MATES is used to inform our environmental justice or how we administer environmental justice programs here at the district. Next slide, please. So AB 617 was signed into law in 2017, and it invests resources to address air pollution issues in environmental justice communities, which are disproportionately impacted by air pollution. And one of the core tenets of AB 617 is to involve the community to help engage them to help reduce emissions in their community. And so there are a few elements that are part of the AB 617 program. And so those involve community air plans. And so those include community emission reductions plans or CERPs, and community air monitoring plans and camps. Other elements include investments in clean technology, rules for best available retrofit technology, retrofit control technology or BART, and access to easier access to data. And so for the purpose of my presentation, I'm going to be focusing more on the CERPs. So next slide, please. So the map on the left shows the 19 AB 617 communities statewide. The ones that are highlighted in yellow are those that are within South Coast AQMD's jurisdiction, and we have 6 of them. So on the right, we list those 6 communities. Our 2018 designated communities include the East Los Angeles, Boyle Heights, West Commerce AB 617 community, the Wilmington, Carson, West Long Beach community, and the San Bernardino Muscogee community. And those communities began implementing their community emissions reduction plans back in 2019. Our 2 2019 designated communities include the Eastern Coachella Valley and Southeast Los Angeles communities. And both of them began the SERP implementation in 2020. And then our 6th and final AB 617 community, our 6th community, sorry, is our 6th community is our South Los Angeles community, and that community began implementing its SERP in 2022. Next slide, please. So the Community Emissions Reduction Plan, or SERPs, include a few elements, and so which is broken down by air quality priorities, which are priorities that are identified by the community. And then for each air quality priority are broken down by goals, which essentially boil down to reducing emissions from that priority or reducing exposure to pollutants from that air quality priority. And for each goal, we have a set of objectives or actions to help further that goal. And those objectives include or employ a variety of strategies, or one of 6 strategies, which I've listed on the right. And so those strategies include air monitoring, focused enforcement, collaboration with other agencies, incentives, outreach, and the development of rules and regulations. Next slide, please. And so the implementation of the SERP is also guided through a community steering committee, or the implementation and development of the SERP is guided by a community steering committee, or a CSC. And this CSC is made up of different stakeholders in each of our communities. And so they may include residents, community leaders, different community-based organizations, tribes, staff from government agencies or elected officials, and representatives from businesses and industry. And so as part of our engagement with the CSC, we hold a variety of public meetings, and this takes the form of quarterly CSC meetings where we provide updates on the implementations of the SERP, or we use those as opportunities to seek community feedback. These also include working team meetings where we can also do like more of a deep dive into a specific topic that's of interest to the community. We also hold public workshops, and we also do community tours where we go out into the community and meet with CSE members who show us air quality priorities that are of concern to them and help us better understand the experience of what it's like to live in their deal. Next slide, please. So far, what I've explained so far is the current state of how we administer I provided an overview of how we administer our AB 617 program here at South Coast AQMD. Now I'm going to tell you about how we use MATES, or how we identified and selected the communities. And this is where MATES comes in. So the California Air Resource Board guidelines, or blueprint, provides guidelines of how all AB 617 communities in the state are to be administered. And part of the selection criteria that are included in the guideline include require that air districts consider a variety of factors. And so these factors include exposure to air pollution, such as concentrations of air pollutants and the density of the pollutants and the levels of emissions from those sources in the community. And also they require that we take into account cancer risk estimates as well. Other factors include population information, such as proximity of sensitive receptors to emission sources. And it also includes other measures of population vulnerability to air pollution. And so this includes public health information, such as public health information for diseases and ailments that are related, that are air quality related. And this includes asthma rates, levels of heart disease, premature mortality. It also requires that we consider socioeconomic factors in a given community, such as poverty levels and unemployment rates. Next slide, please. So in early 2018, we conducted extensive community engagement, and this took the form of over 10 communities where we went out into the community, or sorry, 10 meetings where we went out into the community to really meet with the community and see what factors and criteria that they wanted us to use in how we considered community selection, or what factors we used to consider for community selection. Also, in addition to those 10 meetings, we conducted a variety of we engaged with the community in a variety of other ways, including other South Coast AQMD meetings and attending meetings from other community organizations. And so based on that feedback that we received, some of the factors that the community suggested that we include different air pollution sources in their communities. And so this include emission sources for diesel emissions. And so this include freeways and trucks, the level of oil production and processing in their communities, such as wells and refineries, and also the prevalence of other pollution sources, such as landfills, scrap yards, things like that. They also suggested that we consider land use factors, such as proximity of schools and daycares to pollution sources, the concentration of industries, and the prevalence of green space. And they also suggested that we consider population factors as well, such as population density, income levels, the proportion of communities who are people of color, asthma and cancer rates, educational attainment, and the levels of vulnerable populations, such as children and the elderly. Next slide, please. The community also approved of the use of different data tools in our community selection process as well. And some of those tools include our MATE study. So at the time, it was MATES 4 was the most recent version of MATES, which is published by us. And as you know, it's a study that we do of assessing the air toxic cancer risks throughout South Coast AQMD's jurisdiction. The MATES 4 study found that that diesel particulate matter was the primary driver of air toxic risk or air toxic cancer risk in our jurisdiction, which accounted for 2/3 of the risk. And the study identified multiple sources, emission sources that contributed to that air toxic cancer risk in our community. And so that include sources such as trucks, chrome plating facilities, refineries, and passenger vehicles as well, or light duty vehicles. The community also approved of our use or suggested that we use the proximity of schools and daycares within 1,000 feet of industrial sources and freeways, industrial facilities and freeways. And they also approved of the use of the Cal EnviroScreen 3.0 web tool. And this is a tool that was developed by the California's Office of Environmental Health Hazards Assessment. And Cal EnviroScreen generates a score for each community assessing the burden the environmental burden that a given community faces. And so these factors include pollution factors and population factors. And some of those pollution factors include air quality information such as ozone levels, levels of PM 2.5 and DPM as well, or diesel particulate matter. They also assess the drinking water contaminants, or levels of drinking water contaminants, pesticide use, traffic density, And they also it also accounts for levels of like cleanup sites, groundwater threats, hazardous waste generators, things like that. Also, as mentioned, it also accounts for population factors such as asthma rates and levels of heart disease and low birth weights. It also considers other socioeconomic factors such as educational attainment and housing burden. And so since the CalEnviro screen, since CalEnviro screen, that previous version of CalEnviro screen that we used for the AB 617 community section, OEHA has since released their version 4.0 in 2021, and I've included a link there in the bottom in case you're interested. Next slide, please. So based on all the criteria that I've mentioned before, based on which was approved by the community, the criteria include the levels of, the criteria that the community approved of to to prioritize and select communities for our AB 617 program include those that are in the top 5% of the CalEnviro Screen 3.0 scores. They also include those communities that are have the within the top 50% of mates for cancer rates, and they also prioritize those communities whose with increased prevalence of schools and daycares within 1,000 feet of industrial facilities and freeways. And other factors that we considered as well included community nominations and South Coast AQMD's air monitoring findings, as well as those communities with existing or previous community plans and programs, which suggested those communities that had the capacity to help implement the SERPs. And again, these are all criteria that was approved or suggested by community members during the engagement process that I described earlier. Next slide, please. And so using that criteria, these are the communities that we ultimately made the cut to be on the list of potential AB 617 communities. And so, so this is, just showing this map here. And based on that, from this map, we ended up choosing 6 communities. Next slide, please. And so here I'm showing how mates can be used to help assess progress that have been made in our South Coast AQMD's AB 617 communities. And so these figures have been taken from the previous MATES study, so MATES 5, which was released in 2021. And what it does is it shows the air toxic cancer risk in our communities between MATES 4 and MATES 5. And as you can see, like it shows that progress has been made between those 2 studies. Oh, by the way, MATES 4 was published in 2015 and MATES 5 was published in 2021. It also shows, compares the air toxic cancer rates in our communities against the South Coast AQMD basin as well. So while progress has been made, between the 2 studies over time, it also these figures also show that the air toxic cancer risk in our communities are still higher than they are throughout our basin or than the basin average, and so it suggests that there's still progress to be made, but progress is being made nevertheless. And so I do want to highlight though, or mention that while MATES is a tool that we can use to help assess progress being made in the implementation of our SERPs and in our AB 617 communities, it's just one of many measures that we use to assess progress. And I've included a link there in the bottom to the MATES 5 report, so you can view those results there. Next slide, please. And so if you have any questions, please feel free you have any questions about our AB 617 program, please feel free to email me, or you can email our AB 617 general inquiries page at ab617@aqmd.gov. Or if you want to find more information about our AB 617 program on our homepage, you can please feel free to click on that link or scan the QR code, and it'll take you to our page. And with that, I'll pass the mic over to Mohammed.
Thank you very much, Nish. So, yeah, good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Mohammed Solat. I'm the program supervisor with the AB 617 monitoring team. So in his part of the presentation, Nish provided a broad overview of the AB 617 program. He also talked about how we have been using MATES data for the selection of communities as part of the AB 617 program, and how we can use, again, the MATES data to look at the progress over time. In the rest of the presentation, I'll focus on the monitoring side of things, and I will talk about how we have been leveraging MATES 5 results in development and implementation of community air monitoring plan for the AB 617 program. Next slide, please. Just to recap some of the information that Nish provided and link it to my own presentation, AB 617 is a very collaborative initiative, and during the implementation of the program, we work very closely with all of the AB 617 communities to develop a community emission reduction plan, or CERP, and a community air monitoring plan, or CAMP. So CERP provides a blueprint for achieving air pollution emission and exposure reductions to address the top air quality priorities that are identified by the Community Steering Committee. And CAMP provides a detailed plan for all of the air monitoring activities that we perform to address those top air quality priorities. I would like to add that all of the air monitoring activities that we do under the CAMP are done to support the CERP. So we are not just doing monitoring for the sake of monitoring. We are actually doing purposeful monitoring to support those emission reduction strategies. Next slide, please. So this slide provides an overview of MATES applications in AB 617 CAMP development and implementation. So first off, MATES data provide a full picture of air toxics prior to CAMP implementation. So we do have a baseline to work with, and we can track the progress over time as we are implementing the AB 617 program, especially if we have had MATES measurements at air monitoring stations that have been part of the communities that have been selected, and that has been the case for multiple of these communities. Next, CAMP strategies are informed by MATES results, and that's really the main focus of my presentation today. I'll provide some specific examples of how we have relied on MATES, not just on the results, but also on the methodology to pick the relevant air toxics and methodologies for measurements of air toxics as part of the AB 617 program. And lastly, MATES provides a benchmark for assessing AB 617 air toxic data. So every and all of the measurements that we do as part of the AB 617 program are compared with the MATES. Especially, it's very important for air toxics because typically sources of air toxics are highly localized. So having that regional benchmark to compare the local data with is absolutely valuable and priceless. Next slide, please. So starting off with diesel PM, which is the main driver of cancer risk based on the previous MATES studies. As you can see on the slide here, truck traffic, rail yard, and ports are some of the most important sources of diesel PM, and these are actually some of the top air quality priorities that are identified by the community members in multiple AB 617 communities. So During the previous tag meetings, we had a whole discussion about how we are not able to directly measure diesel PM. So we have to rely on markers or tracers of diesel PM to have a better understanding of how these sources are impacting the nearby communities. And originally in the MATES, we only had elemental carbon, which is measured using time integrated sampling techniques, followed by laboratory analysis, which lacks temporal resolution. But in the more recent MATES, we have added continuous measurements of black carbon, which have provided a lot of valuable information on the temporal trends and source directionality. So these measurements have been really valuable, and we have learned a lot from them. Next slide, please. And basically, informed by the MATES and to build on that, as part of the AB 617 camp development and implementation, whenever we had the issue of diesel PM identified as a top air quality priority, we have relied on continuous measurements of black carbon by either the standard ethylometers or the smaller versions which we put on the mobile platforms. We also rely on continuous measurements of particle number and NOx, which are both tracers of diesel exhaust. And the monitoring approach that we have developed as part of the AB 617 program under the camp relies on two components. We have the fixed site monitoring component and the mobile monitoring component. Fixed site monitoring provides real-time data to the community members, and it also provides a lot of valuable information to support the SERP. One example is that we can, take a look at the long-term trends and see if we have made any progress over time. And mobile monitoring surveys are very valuable in that they provide us with information to identify areas with elevated levels of air toxics, in this case, diesel PM. We can also use this tool to assess potential community impact. But back to the fixed site monitoring, addition of this fixed site monitoring as part of the AB 617 expands on the continuous measurements that have been ongoing as part of MATES, but by basically, performing measurements at more sites. So it's kind of like filling in the gaps. And, addition of mobile monitoring provides hyperlocal data for capturing neighborhood scale variation. So it's also a valuable tool in our toolbox. Next slide, please. One of the main or very interesting observations that we made in MATES 5 was that, as you can see on this slide, some of the highest concentrations of particle number were observed at the West Long Beach site. And as you can see on the diurnal variation plots, particle number peaked during the midday. And in the colder season, we also saw some elevations during nighttime. And both of these peaks are indicative of secondary aerosol formation. And this has been supported by previous studies that have been published in the literature. But unfortunately, other than particle number and black carbon and occasionally particle mass, we did not have time resolved speciation data as part of the MATES. So we couldn't really draw major conclusions in terms of the mechanisms that are involved in the secondary formation of these particles. Next slide, please. So to bridge the gap and to build on MATES, we wrote a proposal to the EPA to establish a site in Wilmington, which is very close to all the three sources that I mentioned: ports, rail yards, and truck traffic. And as part of the proposal, we proposed to perform continuous measurements to do full speciation of PM at this site, both in terms of chemical speciation and physical speciation, that meaning site distribution of particles. And we believe that the campaign is going to start within the next few months, and we believe that these additional measurements are going to provide very valuable information in terms of the composition, sources, and formation mechanisms of PM 2.5 in that area. And since that site will be within the boundary of the Wilmington, Carson, and West Long Beach community, It will also support the CAMP implementation in that area, specifically with regard to ports, rail yard, and truck traffic air quality priorities. Next slide, please. Next, I would like to talk about air toxic metals. Metal processing facilities are a very important air quality priority that have been identified as an air quality priority by several CSCs. 3 out of the 6 communities have actually identified metal processing facilities as one of their top concerns. As you can see here, the communities of East LA, Boyle Heights, West Commerce, Southeast LA, and South LA have all identified this air quality priority. And again, as I've shown on the map, there are approximately 300 metal processing facilities in all of these 3 communities combined. So traditionally, the way we have been dealing or addressing emissions of metals from such facilities has been by doing time-integrated sampling, collecting filter samples, followed by chemical analysis in the lab, ICP-MS or XRF. But when we have this many facilities, characterizing all of them using a time-integrated approach becomes a very challenging and expensive task. And again, time-integrated sampling techniques lack information on the temporal variability of air toxic metals. We can also have limited information about the source directionality, and we cannot really infer where these emissions come from. So the information is limited at times. Next slide, please. So to address that, and as part of the CAMP development and implementation, and as part of another EPA grant that we have been awarded, and to again build on our previous experience with MATES and previous emission investigations, we developed an approach which again relies on continuous measurements mostly, and uses a combination of fixed site monitoring and mobile monitoring. For the fixed site, we have installed a continuous metal monitor at an air monitoring station at each of those 3 communities. And we have also developed a multi-metal mobile platform as part of that EPA grant to be able to perform hyperlocal measurements of air toxic metals in these communities. And we have been performing very comprehensive measurements during the past few years, and collecting all of this information has been extremely helpful and valuable as part of the AB 617 implementation. We have been able to identify areas with elevated levels of metals, especially some of them are located near these metal processing facilities. We have passed down this information to our compliance team, and they have been able to use that information to prioritize their inspection. So all of that is working towards achieving emission reduction targets. Next slide, please. And lastly, I wanted to talk about the Eastern Coachella Valley community, which is a very unique community because of the sources of air pollution or air quality priorities that are identified by the community members. As you can see, several of the air quality priorities that are identified by community members are associated with particulate matter, including open burning, diesel, mobile sources, fugitive road dust, and power plant. Community members also had very specific concerns about the PM or dust that comes from the Salton Sea Playa. And actually, one of the main questions that community members had in this area was whether the dust events, the frequent dust events that they are experiencing, does it come from the Salton Sea Playa, or is it coming from all the desert that surround their community? Next slide, please. So to answer that question, we designed a comprehensive study to characterize and apportion the sources of PM and dust in the Eastern Coachella Valley community. And most of the measurements as part of this campaign were modeled after the MATES study. So as part of that, we have done already performed this campaign. For a year and a half, we collected time-integrated samples, 1 in 6 days, for both PM10 and TSP, and we analyzed those samples for elemental and organic carbon, ions, elements, and metals. We also did some SEM microscopy analysis to look at the morphology of the particles. And to that, we added some continuous measurements of black carbon, estimated organic carbon using the TCA monitor, and also several gaseous pollutants, including H2S, ammonia, NOx, and a few other that I can't remember off the top of my head. So this has been a very comprehensive campaign. We learned a lot from the MATES study, and we try to basically build on that. And we are currently in the process of analyzing the data, hopefully to be able to identify the main sources that are contributing to PM and dust. And eventually, we are hoping to be able to distinguish between the dust that comes from the Salton Sea and the dust that comes from the surrounding desert. And last point that I wanted to mention is that as part of this campaign, we were able to establish a baseline. And as part of MATE 6, we are going to go back to that site. This is for the first time that this site is being included as part of the MATES, but we are going to back to that site, and we will continue to do the measurements, and hopefully we will be able to see the progress that we have made as part of the implementation of the AB 617 program. Next slide, please. And that's all that I wanted to share with you all today. And I would like to end my presentation by opening it up to questions, comments, and thoughts from our TAG members. I specifically wanted to ask a question from the TAG members, seeing how we can leverage MATE 6 data for development and implementation of AB 617 camps and other community air monitoring programs. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. All right, well, with that, we will open up for questions, and I'll start within the room this time, so please go ahead.
Thank you both for the excellent presentations. A quick question or comment on one and a question on the other. In terms of the determination of underserved communities, just a quick comment. You probably have factored it in, but do they determine access to real food and access to public transportation? Are those taken into consideration? Because the correlation to all kinds of diseases, including cancer, is very correlated to both those factors as well.
So thanks for that comment. So MATES does not factor that in, but maybe I'm not sure off the top of my head whether Cal and Virus Screen might. It does include a lot of population and socioeconomic factors, but I'm not sure if Cal and Virus Screen in particular incorporates whether a community is indeed a food desert or lacks access to public transit. But I do know that is right. Like many I mentioned, our community tours, and community members have expressed that concern that they don't have access to fresh food, and yes, that they indeed live in a transit desert.
Okay. I'd also like to make the recommendation, it's sometimes looked over, the WIC program that monitors children, they monitor lead levels as well. So sometimes that, even though it's a very subtle measurement, sometimes the data is available at a public agency and is never utilized for other interests as well, because exposure to lead it comes from many sources, but actually seeing it there is a good warning sign. So just a comment, but thank you. By the way, I'm part of the EJAG committee. Have you come and visited that group to give this talk?
Yes, we actually presented last week.
Was it? Yeah, you gave it was last. Okay, all right. Yeah. Hopefully every year. That would be great.
Yep.
Okay. And a quick comment on your talk. I thought it was very interesting that the Long Beach data that you showed on particulate matter actually showed peak particle matter at around noon. So it wasn't even during, let's say, rush hour traffic. So can we extrapolate that data for other areas as well? Can we assume that secondary particle formation would occur in any high pollution area so that you don't just have to be worried about particulates during rush hour traffic, but the secondary effects that would happen a few hours later when you're giving medical advice to people. So the routine advice of don't work out during rush hour traffic actually doesn't hold true now, because you can you get a double whammy later on, not only in the middle of the day, but what you're saying is actually also in the middle of the night when it's cooler, and you would expect more you would expect a healthier environment. But what you're saying and implying is that may indeed not be the case.
That's actually a great comment and question. I would like to, address that question by first mentioning that what I showed was the diurnal pattern of particle number, which is kind of different from particle mass, which we typically show and talk about. When we talk about particle mass, actually the peaks are observed during morning rush hours and also afternoon rush hours. But particle number is different in that it is also heavily impacted by secondary information, especially in areas where the precursors exist. And we do believe that Long Beach might be one of those areas, and that's why we have proposed to do all of these measurements there. But you're absolutely right in saying that particle number does peak during the midday hours, and it's well established that photochemical reactions in the atmosphere impact the formation of these particles. And typically these peaks coincide with the peak of ozone as well. So middle of the day may not be the health. I cannot really speak to the health effects, but we also do have like other air pollutants such as ozone, which is a secondary air pollutant, which does peak during the middle of the day. So we have to be cognizant of that behavior as well.
Thank you
And I'd
both.
like to comment. It's a great question. And just on the public outreach portion, I mean, like you said, I mean, as far as a commentary to the public, I mean, that's why Scott's team has built up upon and improved upon our air quality index map. That's available on our website to provide that hourly AQI and information notifications. It's also available because our IM department made available on our South Coast AQMD app as well. So that way people can get that real-time information despite time of day. They can see when the pollutants are elevated to affect whether they want that to affect their choices of activity.
If I can just add to that. So we have the real-time products. We also do an hourly air quality forecast the day before. So for planning activities, I mean, it's always best to check your real-time air quality because there are uncertainties in the forecast. But the hourly air quality forecast can tell people kind of when we expect air quality index levels to be lowest. We also issue a cleanest time of day product that gives people just like a few words. It says cleanest time of day, 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. or maybe in the evening. And that changes based on the forecast, which also changes based on time of year and meteorological factors and emissions.
That's actually a wonderful tool and needs to be more. I mean, I'm aware of it because I'm on the committee, but when we're trying to help the general population stay healthy, exercise, they can't rely on just a rule of thumb of time of day, but really do need to leverage the tech and the resources we have available to protect themselves and optimize. And that's just a good message just in general. Just looking or timing things can be very misleading. And that's the bottom line of the message that you're giving, which is an important one. All right, thank you.
Yeah, and we're always looking to do more outreach. I mean, I think we have a lot of really useful products. We're not sure that everybody knows about them. So if you have ideas for outreach, we can talk offline. It'd be great. Thanks.
Okay, well, there's some more questions in the room, so go ahead.
Thank you. I first just wanted to say that it's really great to see that decrease in cancer risk going from MATES 4 to MATES 5 in the AB 617 communities. That's really great to see. And I'm curious if moving forward, more of a general question, if you're working with the steering committee to move towards using MATES 5 and Coronavirus Screen 4.0, or if you've started to look at that data set to see if there are additional communities that can be identified.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So we do have to I believe we will be revisiting the criteria that we use to assess our AB 617 community list. So yes, when we do that, we will be factoring mates or count virus screen 4.0 and mates, the most recent mates.
Go ahead, please.
Good morning. Thanks for the nice presentations. I have one question for Anish and maybe then a question or a comment from Ahmad. So in the bar charts that you compared the two mates cancer risk, I noticed I think the middle bottom row was Eastern Coachella Valley that had the lowest cancer risk to begin with, perhaps because there's less diesel particulate matter there. But I noticed the dash lines are also different. Can you explain what those are and what are the references basically? Is it different for Eastern Coachella Valley versus the more urbanized parts of the basin?
So yes, this is because there's Eastern Coachella Valley is not in this South Coast air basin, and it's in a separate basin. So there's different levels of cancer risk based on that. So that's why we compare the Eastern Coachella Valley's AB 617 community's cancer risk against that separate baseline. Yeah.
Thank you. And then a question from Ahmad or a comment. I think it would be nice with the measurements you have if you can also separate out sea spray versus playa emissions. I don't have a good way of thinking about it, but I think there could be differences in composition coming out and implications for health. If it's basically sea spray could carry different, bacteria-related toxic components as well, whereas playa could not. So those two things, maybe if your data can separate them, would be nice to have.
Thank you so much for the comment, Roya, and we will be reaching out to you whenever the source apportionment study is done, because you do have extensive experience in that area, and we rely heavily on the papers that you have published to, inform our source apportionment. So we'll definitely be in touch. We'll be talking about, the interpretation of our results, and hopefully we can get very meaningful results out of this campaign. But thank you so much for the comment.
Great, thanks. All right, at this point, I'll turn to the questions we have from our TAG members online, and I'll start off with Will Porter.
Yes, thank you. Also very interested in that source apportionment in the Eastern Coachella Valley. And I had a quick question just about some of those monitoring approaches that were described. I apologize if I missed this, but the continuous measurements that are described in one of those slides, are those at the Mecca site? And is that part of the data sets that are already being collected on the AB 617 web pages, or is that a separate effort from those monitoring efforts?
Good morning, Will, and thank you so much for the question. So I actually spoke about the Eastern Coachella Valley at one of the last slides. So yes, those are the measurements that are done at the Sol Martinez site, the Mecca station. And we have already, I think, talked about that with you extensively. But I also had some different slides talking about a separate campaign that we are going to have at the Wilmington site. So
okay.
I'm not sure which one you're referring to, but I can talk more about.
Yeah, I was interested in those Sol Martinez measurements. Is that still ongoing, or has that been wrapped up? I was under the impression that it had been wrapped up, but from the slide, it looked like it might still be going on.
Right. So the time integrated portion has been wrapped up.
Okay.
The last measurements were conducted in May of 2023, but we have kept the continuous monitors at the site, so measurements are ongoing.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Yep, thank you.
Great, all right. Philip Hopke, you're next. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, obviously the answer to the question that Mohat had posed was source apportionment, since that's my thing. Obviously we have the source apportionment results from the previous ones. We can see the differences at the various sites. And again, the diesel estimates that are being done based on black carbon are going to have some high bias at the moment, because there are other sources of black carbon besides diesel. And so the more we can get better resolution of diesel from other sources and more multiple markers, the better you're going to be able to assess the cancer. I just wanted to comment on the question of particles numbers going up at noontime. In part, that's because of the success we've had in reducing PM 2.5. When we take PM 2.5 out, we've removed a lot of the surface area that served as condensational sink for the things that are the secondaries that are getting formed. Now that sink is no longer available, and so we get more smaller particles in the midday photochemical. And we can actually separate the time of day and look at the rise and fall of each kind of basically nucleation events between traffic and photochemical nucleation. In Rochester, we've seen a significant drop in the vehicular PNC, particularly as we've taken sulfur out of mobile fuels. But we're seeing, again, the rise in the midday peak here as well, as we've taken the PM 2.5 and reduced the condensational sink.
Thank you so much, Phil, for providing the feedback to the question that I posed and sharing your insights on the particle number trends. That makes a lot of sense. Thanks for providing that.
Okay, great. All right. Our next commenter from our tag group is Michael Jarrett. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, thanks for the informative presentations. I guess if you are looking for information on oil wells, that data set is a little bit complicated, and we're working with it extensively as part of my Aliso Canyon disaster health research study. So when you get to that point and you want to start extracting those data, we would be happy to help you with that. And also, I would say that the abandoned wells and capped wells are a big concern to the communities as well. So because those have the potential for leaking air toxics. And then just going back to the Cal and virus screen, just a few comments on that. And one is to answer our colleague in the room, there is no assessment of food access in Cal and virus screen. So that's problematic. The other two aspects of Cal and virus screen that are somewhat problematic for identifying communities of concern are one that, you know, as far as I know, and we've looked at this in a lot of detail until very recently, unless it's changed, but they use, you know, very coarse interpolations from government monitoring sites to get their PM 2.5 and ozone estimates. And I think either through MATES or through other exposure models that you have, you could do more to enhance the assessment of polluted areas for those two key criteria pollutants, because it's really, you know, they're pretty gross oversimplifications what's in EnviroScreen. And then the other thing that in EnviroScreen that's problematic is the way that they characterize the population health conditions, because they use emergency room visits for asthma and for heart attacks. And for asthma, you know, I think most of the pulmonologists I've worked with and other people that are experts on the life course of asthma, they would say you shouldn't be combining pediatric and adult asthma. They're very different conditions. And asthma itself is sort of a treatable disease. So when people are presenting at the hospital, it's often just an indicator that they don't have access to proper medical care. And then the heart attacks are extremely dependent on age. As we age, our chance of having a heart attack goes up dramatically. And there's no control for age. So we're in the midst of a CARB project where we're preparing more detailed estimates on health outcomes. And, you know, it's still still in process, but would probably be available for you to use to enhance your sort of screening and selection of AB 617 communities. Because I think those aspects are, right now, they're sort of frozen. The other thing about the health data is it's from 2015 in the Callan virus screen. So it's very dated and probably not a great reflection of conditions that are currently in communities almost 10 years later. So, yeah, so, you know, if there are ways to enhance those aspects of it, the criteria, air pollutants, and the health outcomes, I would recommend that.
Great. Thanks for those comments, Michael. But also, I should add, though, that Callan virus screen is just one of the criteria used, right? So, as I mentioned, MATES is also used, and also we also use our own air monitoring information as well. So we do, of course, we do a lot of studies, as you know, and we factored in that information in our community selection process.
Okay, yeah, so, but it seems like you have a lot of models you're going to be developing as part of MATES, the next round of MATES, so that it would be worth including some of those. And I think you probably have much better models for ozone and PM than, you know, what's included in virus screen. So that would be another area that you might want to consider enhancing it.
Great, thank you.
Great, thanks for that. So we have another hand raised for our tag members. So Michael Kleinman, go ahead, Michael.
Good morning. I just wanted to touch back to the issue of the particle numbers increasing during the high photochemical part of the day and also the high photochemical season. And the point is that these secondary aerosols are very low in terms of when you measure the mass because of their small particle size. And so to relate them back to health, you really have to think of consider the mass of it, because all of our health outcomes are based on mass of particulates and not number. Correlation to the particle number is quite poor for most of the health endpoints.
Great. Thank you so much for the comment. I appreciate that.
Okay, I think that's all we have from our tag members. I do see we have a member of the public who has their hand raised. Just a reminder that we'll get to public comment at the end of our agenda today because we still have some material that we want to cover and make sure we get input from our tag members. So maybe with that, we'll turn to our next presentation. And Payam, go ahead.
Thank you, everyone. So again, Payam Parkbin, Atmospheric Measurements Manager in Monitoring and Analysis Division. So during the previous tag meeting, there were some questions about other air toxics monitoring programs and activities here at South Coast AQMD and whether those information and what we're learning from those programs could be leveraged into this, into MATE 6. So I'm going to provide some information on those air toxics monitoring programs that we have here at South Coast AQMD, and my colleague at CARB will provide similar information on those type of programs conducted by ARB. Next slide, please. Yeah, so can go to next slide. And I'm going to speed up my presentation. I see we're a little bit behind the schedule, but just to give an overview of all of the air toxics monitoring programs that we have here at South Coast AQMD, that includes the AB 617. You heard about it in the previous presentations. We also have Rule 1180, which is our refinery, community, and fence line air monitoring rule. And then we have some federal programs such as Chemical Speciation Network and National Air Toxics Trends Program. Other programs where we do measure some of the air toxics, they may not be focused on air toxics measurements necessarily, but there are some air toxics that are measured as part of those programs are the Photochemical Assessment Monitoring Stations or PAMS network, And we have some special monitoring and incident response programs that oftentimes focuses on measurements of some air toxins. Next slide, please. So you heard a lot about AB617. As part of this program, we have fixed monitoring at all of the communities. In the map, you can see all of the monitoring stations used in these communities. And overall, we have about 17 stations located in the 6 communities that we have. Depending on each of these communities are very unique, as you heard in the previous presentation. So the air monitoring activities and the strategies are also very unique to those specific communities. We do measurements of many different pollutants at these fixed monitoring stations that could include some criteria air pollutants, PM2.5, PM10, PM mass in general, in some cases, particle number, and then diesel exhaust tracers and indicators such as black carbon and particle number and NOx. But then we also have like either time integrated measurements or continuous measurements for some of the air toxics, including metals, VOCs such as BTEX, and some other compounds like odorous compounds like H2S and as well as methane. Next slide, please. Because these AB617 communities have, it's like a 5-year program, and they have many different air quality priorities and concerns. One good example was, for example, the map that Mohammed showed with within 3 communities that are next to each other. We have like about 300 metal processing facilities, and a lot of the community members in the AB617 program want additional and lots of air monitoring activities as part of the CAMP and SERP implementation. And obviously, like in order to do this type of measurements next to all of these facilities and within the impacted communities require extensive amount of measurements. As part of this program, we heavily rely on mobile monitoring surveys. Basically, these mobile monitors, these platforms basically can allow us to drive around these type of facilities, emission sources, and into the impacted communities to assess community impacts. Excuse me. Back to the, we have like different mobile monitoring platforms. Each of them is designed to do measurements of a specific suite of pollutants and air toxics. There is one mobile platform that basically is geared towards measurements of diesel exhaust tracers, black carbon, NOx, particle number, particle mass. We have another mobile platform that Mohammed talked about, our multi-metal mobile platform. It measures particulate metals. It also measures similar pollutants in the other mobile platforms, so black carbon, NOx, particle mass, and number. We have other mobile platforms that measure VOCs and gaseous pollutants. One of them is optical remote sensing mobile lab. It uses remote sensing technologies like FTIR and DOAS systems to measure BTEX, total alkanes, formaldehyde, methane, and some of the other pollutants. And then we have a TRMS mobile lab that basically measures a suite of VOCs. And these are deployed in different communities based on those air quality priorities and concerns and the emission sources within those communities. It's to support all of the emission reduction strategies, whether it's to inform community members and us about those sources, to discover new sources of pollution that we were unaware of, to support enforcement and compliance activities, and many other, monitoring objectives within those SERPs. Next slide, please. One great example is the multi-metal mobile monitoring that we did in two of the communities, our East Los Angeles Boyle Heights West Commerce community and our Southeast Los Angeles community. Both of these are AB617 communities. Within these two communities, we had like something close to 200 metal processing facilities. So the mobile monitoring surveys that we did was taking the location of those metal processing facilities into consideration, but we do know that we suspended road dust from brake wear and from actual, the resuspended road dust can also have high levels of air toxic metals. So we also included all of the freeways, major roadways, areas near rail yards, basically anywhere with high volume of traffic, especially with high volume of heavy duty traffic, as part of the targeted areas for this survey. The survey went on for over a year. On average, we were doing one survey a week, focus on certain areas. After like this campaign is over, we can aggregate all of that information into this type of concentration maps for different air toxic metals. It allows us to look at, for example, areas where we see persistent elevated levels of these metals. Focus is typically on air toxic metals, but some of the other metals that are not air toxics are very good chemical tracers and markers for different source categories. So like that's another information that fits into our CAMP and SERP objectives. One of them is to actually perform a source apportionment study based on these data that is gathered to see like what type of sources we see. And our initial preliminary analysis shows that there are three main source categories based on the measurements that we have done. One of them is the industrial emissions. We do see some, hotspots near areas with multiple metal processing facilities. And I want to note that these are typically industrial areas with lots of heavy duty traffic. So sometimes there's a mixture of different sources contributing to the levels that we see. We saw another factor as an indication of non-exhaust traffic emissions. So like these were some of the pollution hotspots that we see on freeways, on on-ramps and off-ramps of the freeways, on major roadways, near rail yards, and near some of the warehouses in these communities. We also see a signature of resuspended soil, the mineral dust. Next slide, please. And then each of these source categories gives us some information, right? So like some of the hotspots we saw near the metal processing facilities, as Mohammed also mentioned, was the information that was used in conducting prioritized inspections, prioritized compliance and enforcement activities. So we do this in a more targeted way. But then we also see consistent elevated levels of metals on freeways and major roadways, and in particular on and off ramps. And that led into our new MATES study that we actually are focusing a lot of attention on doing a comprehensive measurements and also a contract to look at this brake wear and tire wear and resuspended road dust. This is getting more important as we control the exhaust emissions. And then also with the introduction of EVs, some of the tire wear in particular may increase. So like that's one of the reasons that this current MATES is have a special focus on this non-exhaust vehicular emissions. We also saw some areas in these communities with elevated levels of mineral dust. Obviously, these are communities, but I want to mention that we do have another AB617 community that is very unique. It's quite different in terms of source emissions, and that's our Eastern Coachella Valley. Again, I'm not going to go too much into the detail because Mohammed covered that, but that was, again, another motivation why we're doing a dust characterization study in that particular community that is more impacted by this source category. Next slide, please. So moving on to a different program, this is our Rule 1180, the Community and Refinery Fence Line Air Monitoring Network that we have. Basically, there are 7 major refineries in our air basin that are required, based on this rule, to conduct fence line monitoring using optical remote sensing technologies that I think in all cases cover 80% or more of the fence line of these refineries. The main objective of doing this monitoring is to detect leaks or plumes coming from the refineries, provide notification to the community members, to us as the agency, to the refineries for any type of mitigation measures, and also notifying the community members in case, for example, air toxic levels are exceeding some of the health thresholds. Part of the rule is also for South Coast AQMD to operate a network of air monitoring stations in the communities that are near these refineries. These are funded by the refinery. The fence line monitoring is funded and operated by the refineries. And then in this community monitoring network, we measure many different pollutants, and that, excuse me, that includes, for example, hydrogens, basically the odorous compounds and some of the air toxics, volatile organic compounds, black carbon, ammonia, and some other pollutants. We do have, I've included a link, there are data display and access tools that provides this information and make it available publicly. Next slide, please. This is just an example, a picture of one of our community monitoring stations and the coverage of the fence line monitoring at one of those refineries. Next slide, please. Another program is the National Air Toxics Trends Stations program. This is a federal program, and some of the objectives are to assess trends and emission reduction program effectiveness, basically progress, tracking the progress over long periods of time, and then assessing and verifying air quality models. That could include the exposure assessments and development of control strategies. And also provide that data and the direct input to the source receptor models. Next slide, please. So we do have 2 sites within the South Coast AQMD's jurisdiction as part of this national network. Those are Central Los Angeles and Riverside Rubidoux. The air toxics that we measure are metals in PM10, VOCs, carbonyls, PAHs, and hexavalent chromium. These measurements are done in 1 in 6 days schedule, and the data is available for a very long period of time. It's long-term type of measurement program. Next slide, please. Another EPA program is the Chemical Speciation Network Program. Again, the objectives are laid out here. I'm not going to go over everything. Again, some of the objectives are related to tracking the progress and looking at the trends to characterize the annual and seasonal special variation of the aerosols. This is mainly focused on PM 2.5 speciation. I have to mention that. And then it gives us basically a good understanding as well on the visibility impairment and also the regional haze. That's another objective of this program. Next slide, please. Here in our jurisdiction, we have 2 of these sites. Again, it's the same sites as our NATS program. But the speciation is done on PM 2.5 samples. So like the NATS program provides metals in PM10, and part of this program, we do that speciation on PM 2.5 samples, and it also includes ions and ECOC. It has a similar schedule, so like 1 in 6 days. Next slide, please. Beyond that program, South Coast AQMD has its own PM 2.5 speciation program. We have 2 additional sites. So there are 4 total sites. 2 of them, Central Los Angeles and Rubidoux, are basically duplicating the information from CSN that allows us comparison. But in addition, we have 2 other sites, Fontana and Anaheim. Fontana is in San Bernardino County and Anaheim site is in Orange County, and that allows us to do this type of speciation in all 4 counties under our jurisdiction. Next slide, please. A different program that is not focused on air toxics only, but as part of this program, we do measure some of the air toxics, is our photochemical assessment monitoring stations program. It basically develops a database for ozone precursors. It also gives us very good information on the secondary aerosol formation, and it allows us to track trends for those type of precursors. Next slide, please. Sites are again Central Los Angeles and Rubidoux, so like that's a general theme. These are 2 sites that we're doing the most comprehensive sample collection and chemical analysis. Again, these are 1 in 6 days scheduled, but it also includes some hourly measurements during intensive season. And then it also measures carbonyls in addition. And some of those overlap with the type of carbonyls we measure during mates. Next slide, please. These are typically all of our that covered all of our long-term projects, but we do have some short-term, smaller scale projects that oftentimes include measurements of air toxics. These are our incident response program, or special monitoring and emission investigations. These typically begin when we have lots of community complaints about a very specific source of emission in those communities. It could be in response to chemical spills or other air toxic releases. And we also do air monitoring during like fires, wildfires, industrial fires. Typically the measurements are done at the source to assess, the highest levels that community members could be exposed to. The measurements are typically also in the impacted communities to assess health impacts, to provide that information to the community members, to support emission investigations, to support incidents commands. So like it varied, the monitoring objective, the type of pollutants we measure could vary depending on those source of emissions and what incident it is, or what monitoring objectives there are for a special monitoring. Next slide, please. Just to give a very few examples of this, we had this like recent Tustin hangar fire. An incident command was formed, and we were informed that the material used in the hangar could have potential for release of arsenic and lead, and also asbestos. So we did measurements and sample collection in support of this, incident response. We did sample collection for asbestos and metals in communities surrounding the hangar, but we also deployed our multi-metals mobile platform, which is a very powerful tool to drive around the hangar and take measurements. So for example, one of the things that we saw was that arsenic and lead levels were typically at background levels in the areas surrounding the fire, but as soon as we were entering into the plume, we could see a signal for black carbon and from PM mass, but we could also see a spike in arsenic and lead. And that did confirm that if community members are in the plume, they could be exposed to high levels of arsenic and lead. And that was communicated to the community members. We've had this ethylene oxide emission investigations. You may have heard about this. There are some sterilization facilities that basically sterilize medical devices with ethylene oxide, and then that some of that could be released into the ambient air and into the communities. That led into these emission investigations where we're doing measurements, sterilization facilities. This is, we use like canister samples to get grab samples basically, but we also deployed our PTRMS mobile platform to do mobile monitoring surveys around the facilities and into the communities with the intention of looking at the areas with the highest levels so we can place our samplers in that location, and also to drive into the communities and assess any potential community impacts. Now, these measurements are near the source, so like, and it's like typically short term, but one of the ways that this can inform MATES and help us with the design and development of the MATES study is through the method development that we did in these emission investigations. In this case, method development and protocols for sample collection and analysis for ethylene oxide. And ethylene oxide has been added to the list of air toxics that we measure in the upcoming MATES. There are many other examples, so just to save some time, I'm not going to go through all of them. So moving on to the next slide. Basically, question for TAG is how we can use the data for the monitoring program, from these monitoring programs into the MATES, but maybe we could go through the next presentation so you can hear about the air toxics monitoring programs that CARB does, and then maybe we can come back to this question after that presentation.
Great, thanks, Payam. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
Great, thank you. Yes, I'm Dave Ridley. I'm a manager in the Community Air Monitoring Branch of the Monitoring and Laboratory Division of the California Air Resources Board, and so it's great to be here with everyone and discuss this important program. And I'm just going to present very briefly on a few CARB programs that intersect with MATES, both in terms of goals and in terms of the geography of those programs. Next slide, please. So CARB has its toxics program and toxics monitoring sites, and these were kind of developed in response to the Toxic Air Contaminants Identification and Control Act back in the 80s. And the kind of specific goals here were to identify air toxics, identify specific significant exposure to toxics, and then address the health and evaluate control measures. And so a piece of that is the monitoring that goes on. And there are now 14 sites measuring approximately 60 VOCs and metals across the state. And there's also a smaller aerosol speciation network as part of this, which is shown in blue on the map. And these are measuring very similar pollutants to the kind of national air toxics network and the work that's done at South Coast AQMD. So there are several MLD lab methods for VOCs, kind of similar to the TO15 A method, and greenhouse gases, aldehydes, metals, chrome 6. And these are done on a 1 in 12 schedule. So it's kind of useful for the long-term averages rather than kind of characterizing concentrations that are relevant to acute and subchronic exposure levels. And this air monitoring data is kind of essential for ground truthing emissions inventories and modeling, and it's used to support things like the AB 2588 hotspots assessment and AB 617 community air protection program and other rule-making processes. And as you can see from the map, there's kind of overlap here where this monitoring occurs in South Coast at the same location as AQMD monitoring sites. So you can see there's the Los Angeles Main Street, Rubidoux, and up until recently, Azusa. That site's currently being relocated. Next slide, please. So as part of that, and a little bit on the kind of the modeling side, we have the California Air Toxics Assessment, which is providing cancer risk estimates across the state for key toxic air contaminants, focusing on DPM, formaldehyde, acetaldehyde, benzene, a lot of the main cancer carcinogens and some metals as well there. And this serves as a bridge between national scale assessments like the EPA's National Air Toxic Screening Assessment, and then regional studies such as MATES, and then also kind of the Bay Area's CARE program as well. And the data here is collected at both kind of census block levels and on 2x2 kilometer grids. It enables assessment kind of statewide, regional, and on local scales. And there was a 2012 assessment that was completed several years later, and the 2017 assessment has recently been completed, and work is kind of underway on modeling and characterization for 2021. Next slide, please. So pivoting to something else, and kind of with the expansion of MATES into the Coachella Valley, I wanted to highlight some of the AB 617 work that CARB is supporting AQMD on for pesticides monitoring. And so as part of the Eastern Coachella Valley's steering committee, 617 community, as part of their community emissions reductions plan, CARB conducted a monitoring for MITC, for 1,3-D chloropicrin, for a 13-week period between 2022 and 2023. And the 13 weeks is kind of relevant for subchronic exposure threshold timescales to make those comparisons. And there's some kind of similar monitoring underway to support the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District in Arvin, Lamont. And although kind of pesticides and fumigants aren't really kind of typically a focus of MATES beyond methyl bromide, this does kind of highlight the different concerns in different regions and the ways that the kind of different agencies are partnering to achieve monitoring goals and assess health concerns. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, I think these have got switched. Could you go forward one more slide? Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much. Yeah, so lastly, I'm just going to talk about SNAPS, which is the study of neighborhood air near petroleum sources. And this is kind of very relevant because currently it's deployed at the Inglewood oil field in the LA basin. And this program was set up in 2016, 2017 to characterize air quality in neighborhoods that are close to oil and gas extraction facilities and to assess the cumulative air quality impacts from the surrounding areas. So not just the emissions from oil and gas, kind of everything that is affecting those communities, but just with a focus on communities that are near oil and gas extraction. And even though this predates AB 617, it's very much in the spirit of that, as described by kind of Nish and Mohammed and Payam. Kind of there's a focus on community engagement, on transparency. There's a community selection process that was leveraging kind of oil and gas well receptor information, sensitive receptors, air district recommendations, community group recommendations, odor complaints, CalEnviro screen. And then there's community involvement throughout this process. And so that was first deployed in 2019 in Lost Hills in the Central Valley. And as I say, we're now in Inglewood Oilfield. So if you could go back a slide, please. Great, thank you. Yeah, and so this is just showing kind of where we are in the LA basin. So we're about kind of 5 or 10 miles to the west of the closest site, which is Los Angeles Main Street, the AQMD site. And we're monitoring on either side of the oil field. So we've been at the Sentinel Peak Resources site for almost 12 months now. And then at Merrycrest Manor for a few months last year before relocating that site just slightly further north. So the goal here is to get 12 months of monitoring at least, likely to end in Q1 of 2025. And we're also performing mobile monitoring around this area too, so that we can kind of try and capture any, if there are community concerns, we can target those. And then we can also see how kind of representative the two sites are here. And yeah, if you could jump 2 slides forward. Perfect, thanks. So in terms of what's being measured here, it's a huge data volume that we're generating at these sites. It's a kind of over this time period, it's a temporary deployment, but we're getting real-time measurements of the pollutants that you can see there. So kind of ones related, methane related to oil and gas, typical criteria pollutants, black carbon. We also have 2 at each site. We have GCMS running continuously for VOCs, roughly 60 plus VOCs from that. And then at one of the sites we have similar to what Payam's been showing, and the exact XRF for real-time metals. So those are all running continuously, and then we have the discrete measurements, 1 in 6 measurements for most analyses, but quarterly for hexachrome. And so this includes the usual kind of suite of pollutants that we measure at the toxic sites, plus a few extras. There's some extra PAHs and sulfur-containing compounds in there too. I should say, I think the data volume here per site is more than kind of the PAMS, CSN, and NAT sites combined. So there really is a huge amount of data being generated. And we also have the mobile measurements as well. They're kind of listed, which we're doing methane ethane, so we can look at kind of thermogenic and biogenic sources of methane, pollutants related to vehicle emissions, and then also real-time BTEX and other VOC measurements using an entanglement aroma. Next slide, please. And so the kind of the endpoint here is to be able to present this to the public in real time. So anything that we can present in real time that doesn't require kind of a lot of post-processing is getting displayed on a dedicated dashboard. And then we make regional comparisons to using AirNow and comparisons to the national air quality standards. We provide mid-monitoring summaries to the community, and then the kind of real endpoints are source apportionment work that's done by CARB and contractors, general air quality data analysis, and a health risk assessment provided by OEHA. So these are kind of things that will be directly comparable to MATES, and especially MATES 6, because there will be some overlap at the kind of the beginning of 2025, perhaps. Even though kind of SNAPS is obviously limited in scope to just the Inglewood oil field. So there's a real kind of quick summary of several air toxics monitoring and modeling activities that kind of intersect with MATES that may provide some kind of fruitful context and comparison and collaboration kind of during and after the MATES 6 study. Thank you.
Okay, great. With that, if we have any questions for the presentations that we got from our TAG group, anybody in the room? Go ahead.
Thank you. Very nice presentations. I just thought about something after David mentioned the measurements in sort of near the oil fields. I understand that the emphasis is on toxics and primary VOCs that are coming out. I don't know in the basin, and maybe Sangmi, you can comment on this, how well emissions of VOCs for secondary organic aerosol from these fields are characterized, and would it be worth looking at near site SOA formation potential in case, you know, there is a large contribution from these sources? I don't know how emission inventories take these emissions into account and whether they're a good fraction of SOA precursors now that all the vehicular, you know, controls have gone into play.
So I think the two components, one is the accuracy of emissions inventory, and the other is secondary formation that need to be taken care of in the context of the photochemical modeling. So when it comes to emissions inventory, the refineries or point sources, as you mentioned, we use reported emissions. So we have exact location and amount, and then even some the selected limited tag species that we can utilize on. But then our area sources like oil fields is a little bit challenging. However, the locations are relatively well defined. We know where the oil fields include oil fields, then we know the proximity location of it. So the locations and then the chemical species are relatively well known through this the approaches we use. Amount of emissions, there is always room to improve, even though the total emissions, you know, we do lots of different field measurement to validate the SIP inventory, such as aircraft measurement that was conducted like 2 years ago via the UC Berkeley team. So we have lots of kind of checks or balances to validate the emissions inventory. Photochemical modeling wise, Yet secondary formation is relatively, has a higher levels uncertainties, but then that we are well aware of all the, the latest versions of mechanisms, etc. And then we looking at the, model validation more closely. So with that, what I'm saying is, we do have all the latest capacities, but then, any specific concerns and or interest, we are willing to work more and looking at more closely.
Great, thank you. All right, let's see if we have any more questions from the tag group. Anybody online with questions from the tag group? Lelia, go ahead.
Thank you. Can you remind me or share what the plan is for any mobile monitoring during MATES? You shared a lot of mobile platforms, and I think I missed the extent to which those mobile platforms will be active during MATES, or what any plans are for routes or any of that.
As part of the main MATES monitoring strategy, we're going to only rely on fixed monitoring. But I mean, we do have these mobile platforms that are available for any supportive information. For example, one of the things are the projects related to the brake wear and resuspended road dust. So like I think some supportive measurements with our mobile platform could be performed as part of a support that South Coast AQMD is doing for that contract. But the core monitoring strategy for MATES relies on the fixed monitoring stations.
Great, thanks. Any other questions from the tag group? I know we have a member of the public with their hand raised, but I want to get to tag questions before we move on to general comment. Okay, seeing none, let's move on to our next agenda item, which is our open discussion and public comments. So if there's any questions that folks want to raise, we do have one public commenter. I just want to check to see if the tag members have questions that haven't been addressed. All right, Phil Hopke, go ahead.
Yeah, just as you get into doing more manipulation of the VOC data, there are now some good ways to try and correct for reactive losses of the VOCs. And it makes a big difference in terms of when you're trying to look at the consumed VOCs that actually went to producing ozone and SOA. There are ways of doing that now. We've been publishing a series of papers over the last 3 years that have refined those methods pretty well, and I think we have a pretty good handle on how to be able to utilize VOCs. We've also been working on combined VOCs and PM speciation data so that you get more of a complete source apportionment of using the additional species to improve the resolution of the techniques. And again, if there's any interest in any of that, just let me know and I'd be happy to send you papers or work with you on it.
Phil, just to follow up on that. So you're saying that there are ways of quantifying what the VOC levels would have been if they didn't react away to form ozone or PM?
That's correct.
I see. Okay. And then if we're using the VOC levels to do a health risk assessment, to calculate risk, we probably want to use.
No, that's something else, because what you're breathing is what you measure.
Right. Okay. So, but you're
Okay,
saying
but
for sort of emission, get a sense of emissions.
Right, but if you want to assess what caused the secondary products, then that's what's no longer there.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense. That'd be great if you could send along a few of those papers. Thank you.
Sure.
And then Roya, go ahead.
Because I was driving during Sangmi's presentation, and Phil had a comment about ammonium nitrate. I just want to add, especially with the site coming on in Long Beach, now with the Ascend network, we have much finer measurements of ammonium nitrate. There is the Pico Rivera side and the Rubidoux side, which for ammonium nitrate that is, semi-volatile, going with trailer-based measurements rather than filter integrated measurements, having these continuous measurements would be very nice for validation of the model. So keep that in mind, and hopefully by the time, TAG is on the way, we're releasing our data to the public, and so it would be a good source for ammonium nitrate.
Great, thank you for that. All right, I see Ryan Sinclair, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Oh, hi. This message is, this question's for David. Just wondering about the ECV pesticide monitoring. I know that there was a draft released at some point, but I kind of missed that, what you said for that slide. And I was wondering if you had any update from that monitoring, and if there was any detections above background levels.
Yeah, sure. So the as far as I'm aware, the draft report is still the most recent report. I know that OEHA and DPR are working on kind of comparisons to the health relevant values and kind of what those numbers exactly should be. So I think it's at the stage where the monitoring data is out, but the comparison to the health relevant values is still underway. But there were measurements above detection limit. And yeah, I'll have to let DPR and OEHA speak to whether things, kind of where they are relative to the reference exposure levels.
And another question about Arvin Lamont, are you considering the same suite of 3 indicator monitoring pesticides for that community as well?
So I believe it's the same. I think chloropicrin isn't used in the same quantity there. And so based on the pesticides that are applied, I think there may be just 2 of the 3 that are being monitored.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Great, thanks for that. Not seeing other questions from the TAG members. We have one public commenter with their hand raised. So Ji Eng, perhaps you can be unmuted and can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I have 2 questions. The first one is that PM 2.5 speciation, it already is going to have PAHs in it at all sites. Is that correct? Yes, hello, no? Hello?
No, it does not include PAHs.
Why not?
I mean, the chemical asphyxiation program is basically like a federal program, so like it has a set of pollutants that we're measuring for. So like it's designed in response to that federal program.
But you can't add any more to get ahead of the health risks and things like that, because we're such an impacted community. That's part 1. And part 2 is the one that's not is part of road wear, is 6 pp recently discovered as having high environmental impact. I think those should also be included in PM 2.5 speciation, because their environmental impact has only recently been known. And so once again, to CARB, all you guys, all your fixed monitoring, I think you should add 6 ppd and 6 ppdq along with PAHs to actually understand what chemicals in PM 2.5 are potentially killing people. And then lastly, PM 6 ppdq comes from tires, and they use recycled tires in making road asphalt. So doesn't that also make all this road wear it's not just road wear from the tires, it's road wear from the road. I wanted to check that that's also true in the road wear bucket.
Thank you for your comments. As part of this new MATES program, we actually had like a request for proposal trying to, address some of the chemical markers from tire wear and brake wear and resuspended road dust that are not typically included in these, air monitoring programs or even in our previous MATES, and exploring some of these chemical markers. We have received multiple proposals, and some of those proposals are actually addressing those issues. So like this new MATES is trying to include some of those type of chemical markers that were not typically included in our air monitoring program.
Yes, so whatever ones you finally do fund, can you if the proposal doesn't have a section for 6-PPD and 6-PPDQ and PAHs and things like that, that maybe you could have them add that to the proposal that you like best. And then lastly, just for clarification, road dust means dust that actually comes from the road itself, so that 6-PPDQ from the road that has been paved with recycled tires would actually count as compared to roads that have not been paved with recycled tires. I just wanted to check that that's a true statement.
I believe that's a true statement, yes.
Thank you.
I wanted to also add that our NATS program, so like that was one of the federal programs I mentioned at 2 sites, Central Los Angeles and Riverside Ruby-Doo, we do measure PAHs.
Yeah. But the PAHs from PM 2.5, right? I think so.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. And so the thing is to also, which is good, thank you. And CARB also measures PAHs, which I think is also good. But to really think about adding these 6-PPD chemicals and their derivatives, because I think this is going to possibly explain a lot of the health hazards from or a component of the health hazards from PM 2.5. Thank you very much.
And Dr. Ng, if I could just add, so we're paying a lot of attention, doing a lot of efforts to capture brake tire for this MATES. So it just so happens that this TAG meeting, we didn't really talk about it, but last TAG meeting, there was a really extensive agenda item.
Yeah, I know, I was there, yes.
Okay, great. And then the following TAG meeting, which we're hoping to hold sometime in the fall, we're planning also a very extensive agenda item.
Yeah, so that's why I thought I would add these comments for you guys to think about. And thank you to Dr. Epstein for giving a little write-up to everybody. And then just, it wasn't clear. Road wear basically is stuff that comes from the road, not just the tires. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, I think the issue is it's very hard to tell the difference in the measurements.
Okay, so it's going to be the combination of both the road and the tires. And if you take places where the road has not used recycled tires and you compare it to the roads that have used recycled tires, you may be able to differentiate the contribution from the road itself from recycled tires, especially if you measure 6-PPD, 6-PPDQ. So that's another sort of prod to actually measure those two chemicals. Thank you.
Thanks.
Dr. Ng, I did want to also mention too that as part of MATES 3, for any of us who are there, like me, we actually did expand some of the sites and also the frequency for pH analysis. We actually did at 3 sites at a 1 and 3 day schedule to kind of look at a better time resolution of pHs and expand the suite of pHs that were analyzed. So you can read about it in the final report there.
Yeah.
At the time that, the components at the time, because at the tag that was expressed there, and, naphthalene and other pHs were definitely concerned. So we
Right.
wanted into that.
Right. Now, but my interest in the PAH is also, as I've written to the AQMD, is the idea of using, black carbon and PM 2.5 and PM 10 as a substitute for evaluating PAHs and doing intermittent calibrations to actual PAH data as a way of trying to get an effective, almost more real-time monitor of PAHs by calculation. That's why I have this interest in PAHs, but I haven't gotten around to analyzing all the data that's available. But that's my interest in the data, to try to do that analysis myself. Thank you.
Okay, great. We have that data available for those 2 sites.
Yeah, and
Yes,
just one correct. Oh,
thank
sorry. Just one correction. I just checked, and the NATS program, the PAHs are in PM10 cut point, not
Okay.
PM.
Okay.
Great. I see Tiffany Yelverton, you have your hand up. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Hey, I wanted to bring attention to a recent publication out of EPA in Science for Total Environment, where the rubber meets road, emerging environmental impacts of tire wear particles and their chemical cocktails. I can't seem to find a way to drop the link to the paper in the chat any longer. But if you guys can tell me how to do that, I'll be happy to drop that in. It's just recently come available since the last meeting where we did discuss 6-TPD.
Tiffany, why don't you go ahead and just email it to Dr. Epstein, and then he'll be able to distribute it to the group.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions that folks or comments that folks might want to make at this point? Will Porter, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to pass along a question that I got from Michael McCarthy, who wasn't able to stay for the full meeting. But I wanted to just pass that along. He was interested in some gaps in the monitoring relative to where rapid growth is occurring in terms of development. He was interested in specifically areas of high development along the 215-60 corridor, such as Paris, March, Beaumont, Banning, and noting that there's not a ton of monitoring planned for that. And he was interested if there was anything that was planned in terms of being able to validate model output, other types of validation and measurements around there, for example, with mobile monitoring, or if there's any other plans for addressing those kinds of high growth, low measurement areas.
I think in general, I took your comment actually down when you first had your question in terms of how measurements can be used for model validation. So that's something that the monitoring team can work with Sangmi's team to kind of see, are there certain areas that have higher uncertainty in the model that would need some sort of extra validation to provide the extra certainty. I think they already have a robust validation strategy, but obviously, if there are ways that we can ground truth that with air measurements, that's something we can definitely discuss.
Great, thanks. And Dr. Ng, I see you have your hand raised again.
Yeah, hello. Can I ask Dr. Epstein to send me the Tiffany article when she sends it to you?
We'll make sure we'll send that out.
Great, thank you very much.
Okay, last call for questions. All right, Seeing none, we'll adjourn the meeting. Thank you very much for your participation today, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.